and I always stuck out between my peers. But something that I noticed was my peers never treated me any differently. They, all the friends that I had growing up, most of them were white American, and they were very, very like they haven't like went out of the state, they never left the city. They're very familiar within their own communities, and they've never really met anyone like me at the time. But once we got over that initial like, oh, you're not white, or oh, you're Muslim, oh, what's your religion like, oh, what's your culture like, after you get over that initial boundary, especially at a young age, no one looks at that anymore. We bonded over so many things like music, our favorite bands, our favorite like YouTube was a huge thing at the time, our favorite YouTubers, video games. We were all into music and art, and so we all had so many interests that overlapped that you didn't really think to look at culture. And
Hi, Sayara. How are
hi,
you?
I'm good. How
Thank you
about
so much for
you?
coming to talk to me.
Yes.
It's a quite nice day in April in Florida, Tampa, right?
Yeah, it's beautiful
Yeah.
outside.
So, Sayara, tell me where you grew up.
Oh, so I was born in Connecticut, and then most of my memories came from going to New York City to see my cousins, and then coming back home to Connecticut. We moved to New York eventually, like Bronx, Brooklyn, and then when I turned 11, my mom got a job in Florida, Lake City, Florida, and that's where I did my middle school, high school years, Lake City and Gainesville. So I had a bit of a I had experience up north, and I also had experience down south as well. So yeah,
So it's been like half of your life
yeah,
in Florida,
yes,
almost, right?
half of my life.
And do you have any other roots like South Asia? Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
So my parents are Bangladeshi American.
Mhm.
Well, I'm sorry, I'm Bangladeshi American. My parents are from Bangladesh. They moved to the U.S. in, I believe, 1999. And then 2 years later, I was born. Yeah.
Do you feel Bangladeshi at all sometimes?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
My parents did a really good job at raising me in kind of both worlds. So at home, so my grandma on my mom's side, she taught me how to speak Bangla. She only spoke to me in Bangla, and I remember I took care of her a lot when I was like 9 or 10, or sorry, 8 or 9, and I would always like help her give her medication, but like I would have to speak to her in Bangla, so that's how I learned how to communicate. I think I'm pretty fluent in Bangla as
You
well.
are
Yeah,
very good.
yeah,
Not many kids are who grow up in America, right? They tend
yeah,
to forget the
yeah.
language of their parents.
Yeah, and I don't really even think it's anyone's fault besides just, the US is so centered on like English that it's
Right.
kind of like a lot of parents become worried whether or not they want to teach their kid a second language so early. They don't want them to like fall behind in school, but luckily my parents did a really good job at balancing both for me.
Do you go back to Bangladesh sometimes?
We went. I've been there 4 or 5 times. The last time I went was back in 2018. Obviously because of COVID, we couldn't go back a couple years later. So we're planning on trying to go again this year.
Okay. And when you go there, do you can you blend in with your Bangla?
Ah, I struggle a little bit. I can absolutely hold a strong conversation in Bangla. I can communicate fluently in Bangla with my family. But it's very obvious that I'm not from Bangladesh. I have a slight accent here and there. There's some words that I pronounce wrong. Um, but overall, like my family still accepts me, and they don't try to speak to me in English ever. So,
And what about your American upbringing? How American are you?
ooh, I would say if I went by ratios, I would say I'm 40-60 Bangladeshi American,
The 60s American?
60 is American.
Okay.
Um, Only because so a little bit into why I want to study, but I'm really interested in like individualism versus collectivism, and Bangladesh is a very collectivist culture. America is a very individualist culture.
Mm.
So like balancing those two ideals, I find that I'm a little more individualistic in my behaviors. I like to kind of do my own thing, but I'm still very family oriented at the end of the day. But I would say I'm more American.
Right. So what do you think? What about your individuality that um, collides with the
Ooh.
Bangladeshi values?
I So one of the biggest things is my parents want to prioritize, and not even just my parents, just in general in our culture. There's a huge emphasis on wanting to have a secure career and having financial security, obviously because of their upbringing. They want to make sure that I have a set life for myself. So they always encourage me to be like an engineer, a lawyer, or a doctor. My mom's a doctor. My parents are both. My parents really wanted me to take that line. That way I can. That way they are ensured that I have financial security. But there was a lot of fight with them about me wanting to pursue psychology instead because that was what I was really passionate about. But um, thankfully, both of my parents are very, very supportive of me pursuing psychology. But sometimes the community can get a little watered down in their like everyone's kid's a doctor, and so I'm not, and I kind of stick out in that way. But
But it's not that you are like you're pursuing um some kind of art. You want to become a singer or what.
well,
It's still like a decent career, right?
since in career, I actually got my minor in art.
Okay.
So I do photography. I'm a photographer. I grew up playing music my entire life. I was always into the arts. I was really in tune with like my emotional side, my creative side a lot, and I think a really good balance between my emotional side as well as my STEM technical side that I'm also really strong in, like math, physics. Psychology was a really, really good balance between me pursuing something that like helped me be more in tune with like my more affective side while also being able to pursue something that helps me apply my technical stuff. But I absolutely was really into arts and music.
Mm.
I played the bass. I'm playing the bass right now. I played the clarinet. I sang growing up. Like,
I think that's also a part of Bangladeshi culture,
oh,
right?
absolutely. Music is huge in our culture. Um, before we became more practicing in Islam, my dad used to be really, really, really into like music and singing. He is extremely talented. He was the first one to teach me music, and he still is very talented. He never discourages me from pursuing my talents, but over time he became more in tune with his faith. So,
Mhm.
but
Is
yeah.
that a like you can't do both?
So in Islam, there's like some, I guess, some people argue that music is haram.
Mhm.
Some people argue that it's only haram if the music has bad language in it.
Mhm.
So it really is up to interpretation in that regard.
What are
But
your thoughts on it?
my thoughts,
Yeah.
I think as long as the music is not promoting like a harmful, like racist or sexist message, or it's not misogynistic in any way, doesn't like say anything vulgar, I don't think it's harmful at all.
Mhm. Very good. Um, so you play bass? You good?
I'm learning to play the bass.
Okay.
I One of my favorite artists plays is he's a bass player, and I've been really obsessed with it. So I've been learning for on and off for the past couple years.
What else do you play? You said the clarinet, right?
I played the
Clarinet.
clarinet for 11 years,
Wow.
and then I sang. I was in choir. I also did a couple of solo performances later. Not solo, but like with a couple other people. Um,
So you're really artsy personality.
I jack of all trades, master of none.
Still,
I love practicing different instruments, but I'm not like spectacular at anything.
well, not being good at anything shouldn't stop you from trying it,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
What about you said you also do craft or writing? Did you say you write?
I am a photographer.
Photographer,
Yeah,
right?
I also dabbled in writing, but I'm
Right.
primarily a photographer.
So photography, clarinet, bass. What else do you do? You sing?
I also love creative writing.
Really?
And I sing, yeah.
Okay. And creative writing,
Hmm.
right? Okay. Wow. And now you want to get a master's in
Psychology,
psychology.
yeah.
So what are you looking to be after that?
I am really, really interested in cultural psychology. So, kind of because of my upbringing, I'm really interested in the differences as well as the similarities between cultures. Because everyone talks about how different they are, how different cultures are, like collectivist, individualist. But no one really thinks to look at how similar cultures are and how similar human behavior is across the world. So, I'm really hoping that down the line I can pursue a PhD and be able to do my own research in cultural psychology.
This is beautiful. So you're looking to find more similarities than differences,
Absolutely.
right? So there are more things like you find there are more things that humans can come together than
Yeah,
they can be
absolutely.
divided, right?
Absolutely. And it actually, this was I was on an idea that I had my whole life. My actually, when I came in, I wanted to study the differences between cultures, but the professor that I'm working with, he likes to emphasize this idea that humans across all dimensions are extremely similar, despite having different cultural upbringings. So I guess that's kind of like my take now, where it's like there are actually a lot more similarities in how humans behave than there are differences.
Do you have any examples, like, what led you to pursue this thought and this career, that you had some kind of encounter or many encounters or anecdotes where you think, like, I found more similarities between the
Yeah,
people of America or Bangladesh, or anywhere else?
absolutely. So, um, I didn't start remembering anything until I became like 9 or 10. Anything before that, so it was when I became when I moved to Florida. I moved to a very rural, like southern, like predominantly white area. It
Can we
was
know what?
Lake City, Florida.
Okay.
It's a very, very southern rural town. And I was one of, I think, four Bangladeshi families in the area. There were a couple other South Asian families, but as far as Bangladeshi Muslim goes, I was one of like four families, 4 or 5. And um, I went to school actually it was a charter school. It was an art school. It was like kind of in the middle of nowhere. It was like on like this grass field, and it was like trailer homes as classrooms, and it's very much what you think of when you think of Southern white American culture. And I went to school there, and I absolutely stuck out like a sore thumb. Because at the time I used to wear the hijab. Um,
What age was this?
this was from ages 11 to 14. Um,
So
and
not only that you stuck out because you had Bangladeshi parents, but also you dressed
I
differently.
dressed very differently. I always had head covering. I always wore full sleeves, and long pants or long skirts. Um, and I always stuck out between my peers. But something that I noticed was my peers never treated me any differently. They, all the friends that I had growing up, most of them were white American, and they were very, very like they haven't like went out of the state. They've never left the city. They're very familiar within their own communities, and they've never really met anyone like me at the time. But once we got over that initial, like, oh, you're not white, or oh, you're Muslim, oh, what's your religion like, oh, what's your culture like, after you get over that initial boundary, especially at a young age, no one looks at that anymore. We bonded over so many things, like music, our favorite bands, our favorite, like, YouTube was a huge thing at the time, our favorite YouTubers, video games. We were all into music and art, and so we all had so many interests that overlapped that you didn't really think to look at culture. And even emotionally, we all understood each other very well. Like, you can always tell when one of your friends looked a little off, and it was like there was really nothing different between us besides the color of my skin. Obviously, I'm not trying to discredit that having a cultural background makes an impact on your life and can definitely affect the way people make decisions for you, as far as job and school admissions go. But there really was no difference between us.
There's more good than bad, right?
Absolutely, there's more good than bad, and that was something that was really hard for me to swallow. Um, because around late high school, I became very active in online communities like Twitter and stuff. And um, Twitter does this group polarization thing where if you belong to a certain group of people, anyone outside of that group of people are seen as like the enemy, or they're seen as bad. And
Hmm.
kind of fell into that a little bit. I was like, oh, like white people are like inherently awful people because of their race, and that was the kind of the trap that I fell into when I was younger. But nowadays, when I look back at my childhood, I see more good and similarities between my friends and the community than there are differences.
Beautiful. Wow. And so when you go for a PhD program or become a professor, is that something you want to teach about, like
Oh, for sure. I would love to like talk to people about how we are more similar, but I also never want to invalidate other POC. I don't want to invalidate their experiences
You
either.
don't want to invalidate their stories.
Absolutely not, because it is absolutely true that there is institutional and systematic racism. There's absolutely so many political things happening in the world that cause polarization against other POC, and it's like I absolutely don't want to discredit that and the experiences that come with that, because I faced that myself.
But you still want to highlight the good that is there,
Absolutely,
right?
yeah.
It gets buried.
It gets buried so easily.
Oh, so beautiful to hear your thoughts, you know.
Thank you.
And is there anything else you want to tell me about your parents? You don't live with your folks anywhere, right, anymore because you're going to college or.
Yeah, I don't live with them anymore, but it was funny. Me and my dad had a conversation about this yesterday too when I was driving back. I was asking him one of the I was talking so much about similarities. Now I'm talking about differences.
Right.
One of the biggest differences between our culture and more Western cultures is, in Western cultures, once you turn 18, you're kind of like you're on your own. Your parents try to encourage you to get out of the house, start to pay your own rent, get your own income. In our culture, it's you're not an adult until you become an adult. For us, is
Which could be at 30.
it could be at 30, or it's whenever you get married. But even when you're married, like your parents will still like hound you. Like, my dad was telling me, even now, as he's like 40, 50 something, I forgot how old he is. He's always going to be a young dad to me. He still sends money back to his parents every single day, and he's never going to stop doing that, because when he was younger, his parents provided for him until he was able to make his own income. And we were talking about that, and I was like, oh, absolutely, once I'm able to make my own living, I want to provide for my parents the same way they provide for me, whenever that may be. So I still call my parents my home. I live with my parents,
Mhm.
even though I'm here living here.
So going home is your parents' home.
Going home is my parents' home, yeah. And going home is also going back to my apartment with my
Right.
cats and my roommates. Yeah.
So they're okay with you like growing up and doing your thing.
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. And that was an obstacle that we had to overcome too. I'm the only child, and I'm
Okay.
the only daughter. And my parents have been through a lot, trying to give me the life that I deserve from their perspective. So they it took a while for me to talk them into like letting me do my own thing, because I wanted them to understand that I'm never gonna leave them.
Mhm.
I'm gonna bother them for the rest of my life.
Living
So
in a different place doesn't mean leaving.
no, absolutely not. Living here is just me trying to learn more about myself.
Very good.
Yeah.
Just like because otherwise you're living in the shadow of somebody all the time. You
Yes.
don't know who you are for a very long time.
Absolutely. And I've learned so much about myself moving to Tampa.
And hopefully all good.
All good things. Well, I mean, you can't really accept the good things until you've gone through some bad
Right,
things.
right. Well, thank you so much, Saiyara, for coming and talking
Absolutely.
to me. And
Yeah.
maybe we can do a part 2 at some point after you've
Oh,
become a PhD professor. All right.
absolutely. I'd always be interested in that.
Thank you.
Of course.